25,000 Ohio K-12 students have applied for state-funded vouchers to attend private schools under the EdChoice program, double the number in that program from 8 years ago. But there's a new bill that just got its first hearing that would make it possible for all of the state's students to get vouchers if they want them. But as Statehouse correspondent Jo Ingles reported in October, that would come with a huge bill for the state.
Columbus resident Ben Douglas says his second-grade daughter was suffering from debilitating anxiety that kept her from even getting out of bed. So he removed her from the public school she was attending and enrolled her in a private one with a voucher from the EdChoice program.
Her test scores are incredible. Her happiness is great. Emotionally, academically, even spiritually, she's just flourishing and feels so comfortable where she's at.
Because his daughter's public school building was considered failing, and because his family made less than 250% of the federal poverty level, Douglas qualified for the EdChoice program. But many Ohioans don't because they make too much money or live in a school district that's too high performing. Republican Representative Reardon McLean says his bill to create a universal voucher program changes that.
We want to fund students, not systems, and empower parents to make the best decision for their children.
Representative Marilyn John says the way it stands now, some students get left behind in public schools, and she says that's unacceptable.
One size fits all doesn't work. It doesn't work for most things. It certainly does not work for education. And the backpack bill solves that problem.
The Center for Christian Virtue, which calls itself Ohio's largest Christian public policy organization, supports the bill. Its president says the bill will allow parents to choose schools that align with their values. For example, he says parents in the Upper Arlington School District who were upset when the schools implemented gender-neutral bathrooms had no recourse but to accept that decision.
All of their high schools, and I believe their middle schools as well, decided they were going to have single-sex bathrooms. So boys were going to have to be allowed to use the stalls right next to a girl through those developmental times of life. And all those children in Upper Arlington were forced to now use those restrooms, whether the parent liked it or not. And they had no option to go elsewhere. And most of those families were not eligible for EdChoice. A bill like this would be able to say, look, Upper Arlington, if this is what you want to do, if this is the policy you want to have, okay, but now we're going to take, those families are allowed to go elsewhere.
Backers of the bill say vouchers up to $7,500 would follow each child to the private school they choose. But even though 164,000 kids in Ohio attend private schools, along with 60,000 that use some sort of state-paid voucher, supporters of the bill claim that won't take a lot of money away from public schools. The value of EdChoice vouchers was increased in the most recent state budget. An analysis of that increase by the Ohio Education Policy Institute, which does research for the major public education groups, shows those increases could cost the state nearly $283 million over the next 2 years. And this bill would add to that. Bill Phillis is a longtime public school advocate whose lawsuit over the property tax-based way of paying for schools got the system declared unconstitutional in 1997. The state has been trying to come up with a way to fund schools fairly ever since. Phillis says the goal of this bill is to dismantle common public education.
It's a global attempt to take stuff away from the public and put it into the private. And when that happens, poor people end up with the short end of the stick.
Phyllis says any way you cut it, this would take money away from public schools.
If Upper Arlington is getting $2,000 from the state and it takes $7,500 for a high school student to go to a scholarship, that's taking money out of the state pool that's not going to be available across the state to the other districts. This idea that it isn't going to cost any more is just a sham.
In fact, if the bill becomes law, it could cost the state more than $1 billion to cover all 164,000 students in private schools now. Some of those kids are already in one of the state's 5 voucher programs, but the new state budget requires direct funding of those vouchers rather than the money being removed from school districts' budgets. If all 1.7 million public school students were eligible, the cost would explode. And Phyllis says the money will be ripe for misuse and abuse as opportunists quickly set up fly-by-night schools to turn a profit.
Give parents the opportunity to homeschool and give them a voucher for homeschooling. There will be a proliferation of that sort of thing going on. And instead of using the money for education, some of the parents, now we have great confidence in most parents, but some of the parents would be buying off-track four-wheelers as opposed to providing the money for education. We know that there are those parents out there that resist this whole compulsory education idea.
Supporters of this bill say the state will have oversight of those dollars, but that's no consolation to Phyllis.
We know that the state doesn't really monitor. ECOT is a good example. The state doesn't really monitor these private operations. ECOT got caught with a $60 million fraud one year. Well, they were operating that same way for 15 previous years, and the state had no clue about it, or they chose to have no clue about it.
But this bill would not cover students who want to go to a different public school, so it wouldn't require school districts that don't allow open enrollment to do so. Jo Ingles, Statehouse News Bureau.